Hi, Ellie. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Hi Andy, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Really excited to have you on the show today because I've got some questions that I'm absolutely dying to ask you, questions that I've been wanting to ask and get some clarity on for a long, long time. And I know some of these questions are the big burning questions that a lot of our members in the community, a lot of our users of the HMO roadmap, a lot of my friends who are investing in HMOs, a lot of people out there investing in HMOs want to know the answer to. And in particular, these surround commercial valuations and trying to understand how we work out what the values of our properties are going to be.
Yeah, that is the
So
$1 million question.
it's the $1 million question. Now, before we get into that, we have got an exciting new partnership together with you at Bayer and the HMO Roadmap. We've got a brand new partnership which we're really excited to tell people about, which means that we can now recommend you and your services, and we've been working with you directly and can wholeheartedly recommend you, and you'll be able to help our members and investors in the HMO community out there with their loans and stuff. So we'll make sure that we give our listeners the instructions as to where to go and find out a bit of information about that if they need a loan, if they need some finance solutions at the minute. And I guess that's a good place for us to kind of kick things off. Ellie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role in finance and the property world, and perhaps what you've been doing and how you broadly help people?
Okay. Yes, so I work for Bayer Financial. We're a specialist mortgage broker, and we really focus. We don't do any kind of residential mortgages. I don't do insurance and all the rest of it. We literally just do investment mortgages. So we do buy-to-lets and HMOs, development, bridging, and all those things that you need somebody specialist to be able to do. So I've been doing it now for 6 years. But before that, I've done all manner of things in the finance world. So I've been a normal mortgage broker. I've worked for a bank as a bank manager for 6 years. Done all sorts of things in the background, and now I do this, and I absolutely love it because every single case that lands on my desk is different. Everything, I suppose there are still some boring things, but most things are exciting. We've got big projects, and I'm working with property investors and really helping them on their journey. So there's lots of people that we work with that are first-time investors, all the way through to experienced investors. But it's really lovely to see how people grow and evolve, and how their confidence grows, and how you start off with relatively small projects and end up doing crazy developments at the end of it, and seeing how that progresses. And yeah, I love it. So every day's different, every project's different, but we've got lots of experience with all those quirky things. So
a lot of people talk about building their power team around them, and I absolutely agree with that. I think it's critical to making sure that you make the right decisions and sidestep the wrong decisions, and working with the right broker is unquestionably, in my opinion, one of the most important things. And like you said, a lot of it is very different, and I think you'd agree, but very dependent on our own circumstances. The loan I might need for a property might be quite different to the loan that you would need for that very same property. And I think, am I right in thinking that a broker, somebody like yourself, who really understands that this is quite a bespoke process, particularly because we're in the HMO field and it's specialist, but also because this is kind of very individualised. Do you think that's fair?
Absolutely, yeah, because there's loads of different considerations to think about. You've got, the property, and from a lending point of view, the property is probably the most important part of that. So yes, absolutely, it's really individual. So the property's always got to work out in terms of profitability and rental and things like that. But it's so important that we match the client with that lender as well, because depending on your experience and what you're aiming to do with it at the end, and what your sort of long-term plans are, that's really going to affect the lender that we go to. So it's all about having, like you say, a power team who know what they're doing. But equally, I have my own power team. So we have the lenders that we work with, we have solicitors that we work with. I've been in this industry a long time, and I know a lot of people, sort of lettings agents and solicitors and all those sorts of things. So I've got those people around me, so I know who it is that we can go to. We're not a whole of market broker. A lot of people ask me whether we are, and I don't think that that's necessary. We stick with lenders that we like to work with, who do the things that we need them to do. But I think also when you work with a smaller team, in the same way as when you work with a smaller team, it's all about building relationships with those people. And once you've got that relationship, they rely on you, you rely on them. So for example, I've got a lender that we do a lot of development with, and because we do lots of development with them, a lot of my clients are then able to kind of piggyback on my reputation and our experience with that lender. So case that we completed last week as a really good example, the clients have not really got enough experience in the field, but they're brilliant and I've got such a good feel for them, and I'm able to say to the lender, look, I think they can do this. You know, it is a little bit of a wing and a prayer and I really hope that it works, and I'm confident that it will. But yeah, their sort of background doesn't really give them enough, but because they're coming through us and we've got that relationship with the lender, it works.
I think one of the things that we've been working together, and you've been looking at some pretty unusual deals for us, stuff that's definitely not straightforward, and I would say that I've got a fair amount of experience with lenders, and particularly on HMOs, and actually a couple of the projects that we've asked you to take a look at have been very much outside my own comfort zone. So they haven't been the HMOs that I'm used to, but they've needed some sort of a special arrangement. And just looking at some of the blocks that we're developing at the minute, and your knowledge and understanding of lenders who will look at things like aggregate values on the blocks of flats has been really interesting. And actually combining that then with one of the blocks that we're looking at using as serviced accommodation. I mean, our listeners sort of probably thinking, Andy, you're getting into serviced accommodation. You know, what's going on? But don't worry, this is a one-off. But actually, your knowledge that, you know, this was something we really had no idea about whatsoever, and we had no idea whether it was possible. And one of the solutions that you've come up with is incredibly attractive. One of the lenders who's actually really quite comfortable lending on that type of accommodation, and will do it based on the aggregate value, meaning you can really push that end value, has made it it's made the deal so much better. And that has actually been, I've learned a huge amount just from that one project there. So I said we've got some really burning questions to ask. I find, and I get this as well, one of the most difficult things to answer and to help people with is what the end value is going to be. And I've always said, look, there are so many variations to it, but I've only been able to say that from my side of the table. I understand and have experience of that. But often when you get rejected or knocked back or downvalued, or you get something better than expected, it's never quite clear to me as the person ultimately receiving the lending as to perhaps why the decision went in a particular way. So I'm really interested, and I think our listeners are really, really interested to develop an understanding as to how we can maybe get and gain some confidence on what the end values are going to be of our HMOs.
Yeah.
And I think before we dive into the detail of that, I think it would be really useful to bottom out this question and this point around what is a commercial valuation? Is it real? Is it something that we've made up because it suits an objective?
It's a word that people use in so many different versions of, and I think everyone's got their own idea in their head when they say, oh, I'm trying to get a commercial valuation, or I've got a commercial valuation. So what is a commercial valuation? So you've got basically two different types of valuation, and we would call them short form or a long form valuation. So a short form valuation is for bog standard houses and flats. When you buy your own home, that's the kind of valuation that you've got. It's on 3 or 4 pages. It doesn't really tell you any information. It's based on comparable properties in the area. And it ticks some boxes to say it's mortgageable, it's got bricks and tile, made of bricks and tile, all of those sorts of really basic things. And that's what's called a short form valuation. Or you would call that a bricks and mortar valuation, or a standard valuation, or whatever it might be. And the thing that is not that is a commercial valuation. So that we would call that a long form valuation. So if you've seen one of these, they're normally about 50 pages long. They give you all sorts of information, market information, SWOT analysis, all sorts of garbage that I'm not really sure whether we need it or not. Anyway, that's what you pay for. But what it doesn't actually tell you by saying long form or commercial is the method behind that valuation. So just because you call it a commercial valuation, that doesn't mean that it's going to be based on yield. or that you're going to take into account that you've got a commercial tenant, or it's an HMO or whatever it might be. That's not what a commercial valuation means, if that makes sense. So all it means is you've got more information on a report.
Okay, so it's actually much simpler than maybe a lot of us think.
But
I suppose,
what's not so simple then is what goes into
yes,
that
exactly.
valuation. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that is the bit that we struggle with. And I think one of the issues is, and maybe you've seen this as well, a lot of people out, particularly on social media, it's great to see people celebrating their successes, getting great valuations back, and there's even less detail available to us for somebody who's just sort of absorbing that kind of thing on social media. We have absolutely no idea, as to who the lender even is. No. And sometimes I do sit and wonder and question whether it's accurate. Is there context missing from this? And it's really difficult to ascertain. And then of course you hear people get knocked back and they get downvalued, or for some reason can't seem to make it work. So it is tricky. So perhaps can you help us understand then what's happening behind this valuation? What's the actual methodology?
Yes. So I think there's a few things to say on that before we kind of get into this. And I think the word like down valuation comes in a lot. And this is something that I sometimes struggle with, because depending on the type of customer that you are, say you as an example, Andy, I don't necessarily know when you're telling me. So I will ask you some figures, what's your purchase price? What are you planning on spending? What's your GDV? And you'll give me a figure. And what I don't know is how you've got to that figure. So is that I saw one house on the street once sold for that amount of money, or is it an average, or is it the lowest, or I don't know. And I suppose it depends on the type of person that you are. Are you aiming for the moon, or aiming for the stars and hoping to reach the moon, or are you being super cautious in your figures? So when people say down valuation, it's difficult to know how that where that sits in terms of, is it an actual down valuation, or is it that you were just aiming for 20% more than what you were hoping you were going to get?
So that's such a good point, Ellie. And you know what, we're investors, and of course we're going to be biased, aren't we, to try and really push this value. I bought something recently, and I paid over the odds, and I knew I was going to have to pay. I was certainly paid over the asking price, and I knew I was going to have to pay over the asking price, but I did hope that the valuer would come and knock me back a little bit. And I was surprised when they didn't, and they actually agreed with the amount I'd gone to pay. Then I suppose the argument then is, well, actually, I didn't actually think the valuation was that, but perhaps it was, and I wasn't necessarily downvalued. I just sort of put in what I thought I had to, and hoped that everybody else would kind of do the work to come to that valuation, and that was just the way that it came out. So it's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think that is so true of us as investors.
I remember one that really did make me laugh, that a client came to me, and we were talking about what the value we were going for, and this is an HMO refinance, and she came to me, and I remember the figures off the top of my head. Let's say, for example, she said, I think it's worth 285. And then she was asking me, well, what happens if I put 300 or something on this? And I said, well, it's not going to cost you anymore. And then I worked out whatever the fee scale was. We can go up to maybe 350 or something, and it's still the same cost. So, go for a little bit more if you want to. So I think we settled on 320, for example. And then the valuation came in at 300. And she was so cross because it hadn't come in at 320. But I thought, well, you were only going for 285 in the first place, and we've got more than that. So, it's difficult. I think your expectations, and as soon as you have that figure, and then you get the quote on that, and then you see how much cash you're going to get in your pocket at the end, and then you're planning on how you're spending all that extra money, and then suddenly when it doesn't quite work out like that, then you're disappointed. Aren't you? Of course you are. That's how things work. But
so there's as we edge our way towards trying to understand a bit more about what this valuation mechanism is, I think what we're saying here at this point is actually there's definitely responsibility and a requirement for us as the investor to have a pretty fundamental understanding of what the valuation should be. Otherwise, we could well be wasting everyone's time. We could well be turning around and saying, I've been downvalued, when actually that's quite possibly not the case.
Also, the more you put as your estimated value, the more you will pay for that valuation. So if you're well out, you are going to pay extra for a valuation for no reason. But sort of on that point, I would say that we are seeing more and more, and I'm really encouraging all my clients now to create a valuation pack for their valuers, for their refinancers particularly. I think it's so important that you can demonstrate to the surveyor how much you bought that property for, what you've done to that property, and the method that you've got to say how much you think it's worth now. So I think like during pictures, so you can really see, and so many refurbs now are completely back to brick. You are doing so much work on these properties that isn't necessarily evident when you just come and see it at the end. So yeah, I think valuation packs are so important. Loads of during pictures, a really, really thorough schedule of works and costings of actually what's happened, not just what you thought you were going to do. And then also looking at the valuation methodology. So there are, sort of coming towards how we value HMOs, there are a number of ways that you can value HMOs. The most common way of valuing an HMO is a bricks and mortar valuation. And if you go to, I would say, probably 90 to 95% of HMO lenders, that is what you will get. And there isn't any choice about that. That is what you will get. This is up to and including 6-bedroom HMOs, even if they're in Article 4. So, Article 4 is obviously where you've got planning to move from C3 to C4, which you would expect, I guess, to get an uplift in value for, but you don't unless you go to a specific lender. So yeah, the majority of lenders will just look at bricks and mortar valuation. So if we cover off kind of how that works. So that is exactly the same as a valuation that you would expect to get on a home that you're buying for yourself, a standard buy-to-let property. The way that the valuer has to value the property is based on sold comparable properties in the area. So they're looking at properties of similar size, similar location, similar condition.
And I think that's so important there as well, Ellie, because I speak to a lot of people and ask the question, look, where's that valuation come from? Kind of show me the method that you've gone to kind of come up with this best estimate of the valuation. And often one of the things that are quoted is asking prices.
Yeah.
This property up the street's on the market for this is on the market for that. And I often find myself reminding people of the fact
that's not sold.
Exactly. And valuers, that's not the data that valuers are looking at.
Definitely. And also people use Home Track and House Price and all those sorts of websites, which can be useful, but again, they're not, they don't know, in that area, and there's so many areas in the country where this applies, where your road could be a lovely road, but yet 3 roads down the road is not as desirable. So your house is going to be worth more than that, or you could flip it on its head that your house is the less desirable road, in which case it can make 10-15% difference in the cost, and that will be taken into account. Comparables are comparables. You are comparing your property to that. So that doesn't mean that house down the road sold for 300,000, therefore yours is also worth 300,000. It means that one sold for 300,000, but that's a nicer road, it's in a better condition, it's 20 square metres bigger than yours, so therefore yours is worth 280. It's a comparison. So that's really important. The other thing to bear in mind, and this is my analogy that a lot of my customers will have heard before, I compare it to buying and selling used cars on Auto Trader. So for example, you're trying to sell your car and you're thinking, how much am I going to get for my car? You'll go on Auto Trader and you'll find the best example of your car with probably a lower mileage and quite a bit of a nicer spec, but I think I'll get away with that. And that's what you put it on for, isn't it? You're going for the absolute top price. Whereas if you're trying to buy a car on Auto Trader, you're not going to buy the most expensive version of the car that you want, are you? You're going to go in the average or a little bit below. And that's the comparison really between you and the surveyor. You're looking at the top examples and they're looking at the average examples. So, I see so many people and they've come up with these really beautiful spreadsheets and they look at these properties that have sold for brilliant prices, but you could find another 5 properties that have sold for 10-20% less than that. And that's what the valuer is going to be looking at, not the best examples.
Okay. So this data is actually out there. This is sold data. This is stuff that's actually been sold, it's been transacted, it's appeared on the land reg. People can actually publicly see this data. So me, you, our listeners, actually this is there, we can go and do the work.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I do suggest a lot of people do, is go and actually put yourself a spreadsheet together of sold comparables in the area. And actually this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important, Ellie, to pick a particular area if you're fairly new to investing and stick to it, because this sort of stuff and this detail and having this really intricate understanding of your very local market is so important, because actually it's difficult to gather this information and know it about several cities at the same time, isn't it?
And especially when you're looking at cities, Liverpool and Manchester for really good examples, you've got such disparity between such small areas, even I don't know where I live, like you've got one road and then you've got another road, and that one road is so much more than another road, and unless you get into that absolute intricate detail, you're not going to understand your market. So I absolutely agree. I think you need to pick your market, know your market, and do something really well rather than trying to do lots of different things.
So that gives us an idea as to how, in all honesty, most lenders consider and look at the values of HMOs. They're quite literally looking at the bricks and mortar value, and they're comparing it to stuff that has already been sold.
So if you want anything outside of that, so there's a couple of caveats to that. So if you're going 7 bedrooms or more and you've got sui generis planning in place, then again, the majority of lenders will all lenders will give you a commercial valuation based on the yield that you'll get. And I'll explain what all that means in a minute, but just to sort of put that in. And then you've got...
And can I just ask a question at that point, Ellie? Because I think this detail I think is really important. One of the questions we often see being asked in the community is, how do I get a commercial valuation on my 5-bed HMO? Can we get commercial valuations on 5 beds and 6 beds, or is it just 7 beds, or is this a bit of a sliding scale and it's lender specific?
It's absolutely a sliding scale and lender specific. So
okay.
Yes, you absolutely can. And you know what? At the moment, we're seeing loads and loads of yield-based valuations for 5 and 6 bedroom HMOs. But
that's really
you need to know your market, and you need to have a broker like me or someone who has the understanding that I do about where to go, because there are only a couple of lenders that will do that. There are, I think, 2 lenders that will do that. There are other lenders that say that they will do that, but in reality, they will use a large surveying company, naming no names, but one of the big surveying companies who, in my experience, and I've tried this at customers' requests, we've gone to them, we've had a valuation. The valuation is a bricks and mortar valuation. They will try and tell you that it's a yield-based valuation, but you will see super high yields. You'll see large percentages being taken off the rent to cover voids and things like that. So in reality, what they're doing is they're saying, I think that's where a house is worth X amount, and then working back from that to give them the figures that gets to bricks and mortar. So be careful, because some lenders will say they do it and they don't do it. But there are 2 lenders that genuinely do it. And what they do is they have a lot of guidance that they give their surveyors about how they want their surveyors to value properties, and then it's left up to the surveyor as to how that actually works in practice. So the guidance generally says, how do you think as a surveyor this house is likely to be sold on if we repossess the property and it was sold on? So what the surveyor needs to be comfortable with is that the property will be sold on as an HMO rather than a home. So they will look at the property and they need to know certain things. So if your property is a 4 or 5 bedroom HMO with 1 or 2 bathrooms, where effectively what you've done is turned your lounge into a bedroom, and on the whole it still kind of looks like a family home, then it will be valued as a bricks and mortar. So even if you go to these specialist lenders, you're not going to make something that's not there already. So that will still be valued as bricks and mortar. What you need to do with your property is make it have that look and feel as an HMO, so that if it's going to be resold, it will be resold as an HMO rather than a family home. So things to think about. You need 5 or 6 bedrooms. You generally need pretty much all en suites. We might get away with maybe 6 bedrooms with 4 en suites and an off suite or something like that. But on the whole, you need sort of all en suites. They all need...
I just scribbled this one down actually, Ellie, because I had a feeling that this was just about
Yeah.
to pop up, and I thought just in case we don't, I want to make sure I ask you about this. So that's really interesting, and I want to come back to en-suites because I've got some concerns about en-suites. But let's circle back to it, and I don't want to interrupt you because this is fascinating. I'm scribbling notes myself.
Keep scribbling. So 5 or 6 bedrooms, generally all en suites or almost all en suites. I think it's more important if you've got 5 bedrooms, because 5 bedrooms you are kind of on that, like on the cusp. So you need all en suites. 6 bedrooms you could probably get away with 4 or 5 en suites. You need to have that look and feel of an HMO. You need to have your fire doors, your smoke alarms. You need to have kitchen facilities that cover all of your tenants. So 2 cookers, 2 fridges, washing machine facilities to cover all of your tenants. Double rooms. What else? Just, when you walk into an HMO and it's an HMO and you know it's an HMO. It's not a home. It just has that look and feel of an HMO. And if you look at the balance as well between sort of living space and bedroom space as well, you've got hopefully a lovely kitchen, dining, living space area, but in comparison to all of the bedroom space you've got, it's a small living space, which you're just not going to get in a family home situation when you've got a 6-bedroom house, are you?
I think we're talking about the property very much looking, feeling like, behaving like it is nothing but suitable for that type of living, shared living. It's been purpose built, it's fit for purpose. And I think that's why that sliding scale point makes sense, because the more tenants you have, the more regs that we have to abide by, the more safety features we have to install. So, for example, if we start venturing onto 3 floors and we've got a slightly obscure layout, maybe we're into panelled fire alarm systems. That's a really unusual feature, isn't it, to have in a normal residential dwelling?
Yeah, and then the other side, so the property's got to have that look and feel of an HMO, but equally it's got to be in the location that you would expect to find an HMO, because there's no good me sticking an HMO in the village where I live and expecting to sell it as an HMO because, well, although actually right nearer somewhere that I'm not going to say because then you're going to know exactly where I live. But anyway, a university. So you could potentially, but they don't live here. They live elsewhere. But on the whole, you can't just stick an HMO in a random town that doesn't have the demand for it, or even actually whereabouts it is in that town. There are certain areas within cities and towns that are renowned HMO areas, and there are other areas that aren't. So it's got to be in a place where you would have the demand to be able to sell the property as an HMO, and also making sure that you've got the demand for tenants, which obviously you're going to do, although I have seen some which are in some random places and commentary around from valuers to say that they don't feel it is, but that again is really important. And I guess I'm sure lots of stuff in your roadmap about doing prep for that.
Yeah, and I've experienced both sides of that. I would say everything I invest in is in a really strong location from a tenant demand point of view. It's either very close to a campus or the large amenities, and certainly now, many years on, been doing it for a long time, there's a lot of evidence I've got to support that. Although there have been occasions where a surveyor has come out. I own, for example, a portfolio where I have a lot of students. I've had students for a long time, and it's a peripheral campus, so it's not clustered around the main campus in the city centre. It's out to some extent in the sticks, but there are still quite a lot of students out there, and for years had no problems. And then one surveyor one year just decided actually there was no demand there, and that was an interesting learning curve for me. But again, I think what you're saying here is that as investors, we've got to take this responsibility to get this bit right. And I think what you said there earlier was you can't just pick a house anywhere and just decide you're going to turn it into a HMO and then almost expect everybody else to fall in line. In particular the lenders, because that demand isn't there. And I do see people doing this, and it does concern me sometimes. People are purely driven by yield and the potential return of capital they can get. So they look for properties perhaps a bit beyond the Article 4 directions, maybe in some of those towns where there's less interest, properties are a bit cheaper. Maybe they're on nice plots, detached plots, corner plots where you can extend and really add that value. And yes, probably find some tenants, but then struggle to construct a really valid argument to say actually that there's a consistent supply of those sorts of tenants, and that I think that is a bit of a concern, and people should be aware that that's not going to make your life
not just
easy.
for your valuation, but for your long-term, property strategy. You need to know, obviously things do change, markets change, especially with students. You've got purpose-built student accommodation that you may not know about, appearing or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think it's really important. Some lenders are more fussy on others. I had an example a little while ago where a client had tried to go to one lender, a sort of less specialist lender, through a different broker. They tried two lenders actually, and both lenders had said no to the property because they felt that it was outside of sort of the HMO market. It was in Bradford, which is a renowned HMO area, but this wasn't in the HMO area in Bradford, so as an example. But then we went to a more specialist lender, and the valuer was still a bit cautious about it, but basically the property wasn't worth a huge amount of money, and it would have fit on a standard AST rented to professionals. So the lender took the view that if the client wasn't able to fill it as an HMO, they could easily let it to a family. This was, I think it was a 5-bedroom, so it wasn't, a proper HMO in that sort of respect. You could have let it out to a family, and it would still fit. So they took the view that it works on that basis, and they lent on it on that basis. So again, I think it does come down to the lender, and going to a more specialist lender, which are the ones that will look at the commercial valuations of property, but they are more willing to take a view on things, and we're more able to speak to underwriters and put our point across. And it's not a computer said no decision. It's let's take a sensible approach and see whether it's something we can look at. So yeah.
Okay, and I think that's what we want to hear as investors. We want to know that actually some of the subtleties of our particular case and property and location actually will be considered by the right lender. And it's great talking to you, Ellie, because it's fascinating getting this sort of eye into what happens on your side. It's been a guessing game for me for so many years, and it's really interesting to hear that actually what's happening. So I guess we're moving edging ever so closer to now to understanding this piece around getting the values based on the actual yield, and also maybe off the back of this, or maybe it's related, Ellie. We sometimes talk about hybrid yields and this combination of both. So I don't want to jump ahead, so I'll let you go for it. But
that's what I was going to sort of go into. So you have, again, like within that, so you've got your type of property. So let's assume that the property's okay, but the value is happy. With 5 and 6 bedroom properties outside of Article 4 with specialist lenders, there's a couple of different ways that they can value the property. So you have what's called a hybrid. So this hybrid word, again, is thrown around a little bit like commercial valuations, where I think people not entirely sure what it means. What it means is that the lender is giving the surveyor free rein to value the property how they wish. That's what it means. So it's not a calculation, it's not a guarantee. It means that the surveyor has got those options. They're not limiting them to a bricks and mortar valuation. So when we say a hybrid, we mean that the valuer can have a look at it. And there's sort of two ways that they can value it. They could do bricks and mortar. If they're not going to do bricks and mortar, there's two ways that they can look at it. One way they can look at it is the total cost that you've gone in with. So your purchase price plus your refurbishment costs. That is a very general calculation. It doesn't necessarily work out exactly those two figures. But again, it does come back to the fact that you do need a really good valuation pack. You need a really thorough schedule of works, and you need to make sure that you've put everything that you have spent on that schedule of works, because that will be taken into account. There's a couple of other things that they'll look at. So if the market has really improved or dropped since you bought the property, that will be taken into account. I've had a few where the valuer felt that it was, that the client got the property at an absolute bargain. Property prices had gone up since they bought it, and so they've got a bit more than the purchase price plus the refurbishment costs. Equally, I've seen it the other way around. Not necessarily the market going down, just because it probably hasn't the last few years, but where people have overspent on their refurbishment costs, and that does happen. If you've put in marble worktops and marble floors, for example. You know, that's not necessarily going to add value to a terrace property in Manchester. You don't need that.
So
There will still be a ceiling.
So just because you decide to spend more doesn't actually mean that this is going to be reflected in the valuation at the end of the day. And again, I think this highlights that you've really got to very acutely understand what the brick and mortar value is going to be, what the ceilings are on the street, and these sorts of nuances. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you don't with this type of valuation, the valuer is not looking at sole comparable property, so you haven't necessarily got that ceiling of bricks and mortar. But I think you've still got to be sensible in your costs and understand that. Yeah, do you know what? There are benefits sometimes in spending more money on heating systems and all these things that you think, do you know what, I can spend more on it now, and hopefully I won't need to touch it for 10 years. And that's going to, for me, you know, as an investor, that means that I've got less maintenance. I'll keep my tenants in the property for longer because it's a better quality product. I'm going to have less void periods because it's a better quality product. Hopefully I'm going to have tenants that enjoy being there. And so actually it's worth spending the money for that, but it's not necessarily going to add value as such to the property. So it, yes, swings and roundabouts. I don't think that you need to think more just than the valuation, don't you? You know, there are other reasons why you're going to spend a bit more money on doing a refurb in a property.
Definitely.
Yeah, but so that's your hybrid. The other way that they can value it, and this is generally how they would value it in an Article 4 area as well, again with the specific lender, with the type of property that's eligible, is on a yield basis. So I'll talk you through how to work out.
I'm getting the popcorn out.
Get the popcorn. This is the juicy bit. So what you need to do, first of all, is work out what your market rent is. Now, market rent, not actual rent. You may have an all singing, all dancing, beautiful, brand new refurbed HMO, and you're commanding higher rent than market rent. That's brilliant, obviously, that's great. But a valuer is not going to look at that, because in their mind, if you don't keep up the maintenance of that property, you're not going to get that rent forever. So they will always look at market rent. So get your annual market rent, deduct 15% from that, and that will cover bills and void periods. Something just to note on that, obviously bills are going up, hot topic at the moment. I don't know whether that will affect the amount that they take off. It'd be interesting to see. So you might want to think about maybe taking 20% off instead of 15 as a kind of worst case scenario. No one's told me that, it's just my opinion. But yeah, bills are going up a lot, aren't they? You know, increasing hugely. So something to bear in mind. So you deduct your 15% from your annual rent, and then you divide that by the yield that you would expect to get in that area. And that's really the bit that is the unknown. I mean, there are some areas that we do lots of work with, and I know those areas very well. And, you know, if you give me an area of the country, I could probably give you a rough guide.
So let's try Nottingham. So a good student, very established Article 4 direction, massive student population.
So I would say in Nottingham, you're probably looking at 6 to 8% yield, and a valuer will probably look at about 8% in Nottingham. They're always going to look at the higher end of the yield spectrum, because that gives you a lower valuation. I had somebody ask me why yesterday. And do you know what? I should have probably found out before. I don't really know where to go. But in the southeast or the south of the country, property prices are higher, yields are lower. And so if you have a lower yield, you will get a higher valuation. So that's kind of reflective of, I think it's kind of the other way around. It's not like, why do you get a lower valuation? It is the fact that you do have a higher yield, therefore it is worth less money, rather than the other way around. The further north you get, you know, as a general rule, the higher the yield that you will get. So in Manchester, you're probably looking at, you may well get a different figure, but valuers will generally be looking at sort of 12, sometimes 14%, which is not ideal. But yeah, normally 12%, I would say, in sort of Manchester, and similar for Liverpool.
Okay, so those northwest areas are carrying slightly higher yields. So your valuer is going to take that into account when they determine your valuation. So they're using that almost to reverse engineer everything to come out with a value for your property. But it's but it's based on
Market
market
rent.
rents. It's not based purely
No,
on
it's
your rents that
exactly that.
you've
Exactly
achieved.
that. So if you were an investor investing in Nottingham, for example, what is the yield that you expect to get in that area? And then you need to be looking at kind of the higher end of that spectrum.
Yeah. And I think it's probably worth, Ellie, just this yield piece, just for our listeners who aren't totally sure. I think a lot of us will be comfortable with what yield is. It's sort of our net income, I suppose, what we're left with after all of the costs used within the context of what the property value is. This yield, this 6%, this would be taking the example of a cash on cash yield, would it be? Somebody who, so let's say if I've bought a property cash and I've got my expenses on it and I've got my costs of X, Y, and Z, the figure that it sort of ultimately came out would come out at about 6%. Would it? Is that kind of how it's derived?
Yeah, if you look on Spare Room or similar to find your market rents, look at Rightmove and look at your sold properties, and then you divide your annual rents by your property value, and then that will give you your average yield that you'd expect to get in that area.
Okay. And this calculation, though, they're deriving that from the net yield. So that surveyor is taking into account what the costs are going to be and all of that stuff.
They are.
So.
But that's very much an average of that city, town. It's not specific to HMOs. It's not specific to the location of your property necessarily. So it may well be that you're getting 12% yield from your HMO, but market yield would be 10 or 14 or whatever it might be. So it's not reflective of your particular property, if you're an investor in that area. But I would say they're quite generic, really. Bath, for example, sort of renowned for having a 6% yield. Like that's what you will get on a valuation in Bath. So your property prices are much higher in Bath. It's Article 4 on the whole.
So the good thing here then is if we buy something that's at good value, and we can add, let's say, a couple of rooms to that, we can really push the rent up by maybe not necessarily increasing the spec, although we probably would do, but just trying to increase the rental value by adding rooms, and then we know that surveyor is going to take into account the market rents. But if we bought that at good value, really added that rental valuation to it, then that's going to be really favourable for us if this is in a place, let's say, like Nottingham, where average yield is 6%, because that valuer, that's going to give us a lot of scope in the calculation for that valuer to say, you know what, your rents are up here and you bought your property down here, but actually we could carry a valuation much higher than that, which would bring the yield in line.
When they're looking at yield, they're not looking at your purchase price or your refurb cost. That's not coming into it at all. It's literally just looking at your market rent.
Okay, so then they're not bothered about what you did before, but they're just going to look at how far they can take it. So if you have bought at a good value and really, then you'll
benefit from that regardless, because your end value, it will be kind of the same, won't it? It doesn't really, your purchase price and your refurb costs are kind of irrelevant. So if you've overspent on the purchase or the refurb or both, then you're not going to be, it won't be as profitable. But if you've got it at a lower value initially and you've spent well, then you will gain from that end value.
So I think that this really highlights, actually, at this point, I think a fundamental difference, and I think a point that a lot of people stick on. I think a lot of people out there trying to really sort of work these commercial valuations think that what they spend on the property and the amount of value that they add through the bricks and mortar process is actually going to have the big impact. But actually, it's what we do with the rental valuation. It's really adding those bedrooms or turning it into a HMO in the first place that's going to drive that yield up. And I think that's a really important point, because I think a lot of people do spend a lot of money and time doing some really elaborate and fantastic things with the properties, but maybe don't move the dial enough when it comes to actually increasing the rental valuation.
The rental value, yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely some discussion to be had about, are you better off with 4 large rooms with lovely en suites versus 5 with 3 en suites that aren't quite as nice and things like that. And I think that's where you've got to look at your market rent. You've got to look at your market and how much you're going to get for those rooms. And, you know, if you've got 6 small rooms, the bigger you go with HMOs, as I'm sure you know, the less desirable they are on the whole, and the less rent that you will get. So having slightly smaller property, slightly smaller number of rooms that are bigger, may well give you the same rental as a bigger, more rooms, but not quite as nice, or not quite as big.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're maybe more likely to keep tenants in there for longer and all those sorts of things. There's more. I think there's more to it, definitely, than just maxing out the number of bedrooms. But yeah, it's definitely a consideration.
I think what's clear here is that we would like to think that this was a black and white topic, and the valuers were told to go out with their calculation, and there was just an absolute figure. And obviously, when we're looking purely at yield-based calculations, to some extent that is the case. But from our point of view, as investors, where we're trying to both increase value and add brick and mortar value. I like to add value to the bricks and mortar because I like to have that sort of security in my portfolio, and that's that's a key part of my strategy. But I think balancing all of these things and getting that rental valuation up, and understanding our areas and locations, and understanding that they're using market rents, and knowing what the average things are, and knowing how the number of bedrooms will impact you, and knowing that the more commercialized you want to be, the less lenders you have in the market. And am I right in thinking really that the more we sort of move in towards that box of commercial lenders and looking at things like yield-based calculations, we're obviously looking at fewer lenders. Are we looking at more expensive rates?
You are, yeah, they are. Although actually it's interesting because the more commercial lenders, so as I said, going back to, there is really 2 within that commercial market that will look at, that they give the surveyor free rein to do what they want in terms of this valuation, because there are other lenders that sit in that commercial space that don't do that. So it's important to note that. But yes, they are more expensive. The difference is becoming smaller because within the specialist market, most lenders have a floor on their base rate of 0.75 because they used to use LIBOR, which was always higher. They've always had this floor there. So with the less specialist lenders, high street lenders and the like, rates are creeping up. Obviously, base rate's gone up twice, isn't it, the last couple of months? So rates are going up where people are using a true base rate, whereas with the more specialist lenders, those rates haven't gone up over the last couple of months because they haven't caught up to the floor. So base rate can go up again to 0.75, and again those rates shouldn't change. So we are seeing the difference reduce. I don't know how that's going to look long term, but yeah, you're probably looking at a difference of between 0.5 and 1%.
Okay, so it's not massive. I mean, I guess a point will have a big difference if it's on £200,000 or £300,000 more, of course. But it's all relevant. Yeah.
But I think that's where it's really. But it's not black and white. And what I try and do with all of my clients is run through, their experience, the type of property, the location of the property, and then we'll go through, what would your bricks and mortar value be, and I'll give them a hand. The information's out there. I don't know every location specifically, but we can have a look on Rightmove and we can come up with some ideas about what we think would be some reasonable comparables. We can do a hybrid calculation based on what they've spent on the property. We can do a yield-based calculation, and we've got those 3 figures, and I can give you a quote based on all of those. And if there's a £20,000 difference between the bricks and mortar and the yield basis, no, it's probably not worth it. But if it's I had one recently where we did 2 actually for one client. One with a less specialist lender, got bricks and mortar valuation, came in, 290 or something like that. We did a similar property. It was a nicer property. It was in a nicer area. It was a Victorian property. The other one was a more modern property. So the difference is not just on a yield basis versus bricks and mortar, because it was nicer. But the other property with a specialist lender and a yield-based valuation was 400 versus just under 300. So huge difference. Probably
Massive.
50,000. Yeah, probably 50, 60,000 of that was the valuation calculation. Probably the other 40 was just, the location of the property. But still, if that means you've got an extra £45,000 in your pocket, it's probably worth paying the extra. But you've always got to be thinking what's your long-term plan? Where are you trying to get to? Because if your plan is to recycle your money as much as you possibly can, buy more properties, let more properties, increase your cash flow, then actually a difference in 1% of an interest rate is not going to make a difference, is it? What's important is that you continue to recycle that money, which may well give you 1 or 2 more properties before you run out of money, which is going to make an enormous difference to your cash flow.
Massive.
Yeah.
It allows you to maybe add another £1,000 or £1,500 of net income
Exactly. Yeah.
to your, every single month,
Yeah.
which is massive.
Yeah. So a difference of £200 or £300 a month on your mortgage is something not important, is it?
Yeah. Versus 1,000 or 1,500 coming in. It's very simple maths.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to do, that's the way to do it. And I think that is what a lot of people want to do.
Yeah.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to recycle capital. We're paying more for properties.
Yeah.
And there's more competition. There are many more eyes on the HMO market because it's very much a mainstream strategy now. Lenders love it because it works so well, and of course they get a lot more coverage in their in their rent calculations and stress calculations and stuff. So it's really interesting. And do you think that this lending market will continue to increase? I feel like a couple of years ago this question may have been a bit more difficult to answer. And I feel like in the last couple of years, more people have come forwards and the products have become more competitive. And actually, we're starting to see rates go up a little bit. But actually, I feel like we've definitely seen rates come down. I mean,
yeah, they have. I mean, the market is definitely expanding. That specialist market is definitely expanding. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've been doing specialist mortgage lending since 2016, and in that time, the market has changed so much. We're obviously doing quite a lot of refinances now of people that I did 5-year fixed with 5 years ago, and seeing where they were. We were quite often restricted to 65% loan to value. Lenders were looking at part and part repayment and interest only. There was loads of caveats that they were looking at then, whereas now you'll get 75% on interest only. There'd have to be something weird with the property or with you or something. It's unusual not to get that now. So I definitely think the market's expanding. There's another lender actually that have popped into this market. We don't have quite as much control over the valuation process, but they do ask for a hybrid valuation. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how that pans out. But yeah, they're relatively new to the market. I do think it will continue to expand because, like you say, HMOs are becoming far more mainstream. But also, I did some work with one of the lenders with Shawbrook actually a few years ago, and we did a big marketing campaign about changing the face of HMOs, because I think for a long time HMOs were grotty student digs. I've lived in them myself.
I mean, this sounds like my kind of campaign. Ellie. I mean,
yeah, but we went to see, as the clients that I was working with in Liverpool, and we went to visit a couple of their HMOs, and we did some filming and sort of showed around everything. And it was about trying to change the opinion of the lenders and the underwriters and everyone within the lender, so that they have an understanding about what sort of properties they're lending on. I think, people, go to uni, you live in pretty grotty accommodation, and I think that sort of stays with you, and your sort of opinion on HMOs is that's what they are. And obviously there are still a lot of those types of properties out there, but investors like you, Andy, there's lots of people that we now work with who are making beautiful properties. You can see it all over social media. The properties are absolutely beautiful. They are designed, they're styled, they're lovely houses that people want to live in. And I think we need to change that opinion more and more. And as we do that, more lenders will want to get involved and want to get into that market.
Well, I think definitely from my seat, that's really great to hear. That's the sort of positivity that we want to see coming from within the market. And I think I very much think that the HMO market has a long, long way to go. I know we think that it's getting a bit tougher, Article 4 directions and more legislation and property values and yield starting to get squeezed, but I still think there's a long, long, long way to go. If we think about where the buy-to-let market is and what people have to lend on and do that, I think there's still a huge amount of scope here. So for anybody listening that thinks that maybe they've missed the boat, I mean, I think...
No,
I don't think so at all.
Not at all. But I think also as new generations come through, you can already see a lot of people in their 20s now who are not bothered about buying property, who have other priorities, who want to travel and have the flexibility of renting, but you don't necessarily want to live by yourself. You don't want to be in a studio or one bedroom, which is what you can afford. Why not live in a beautiful house, share it with other people, have that social aspect, and have the entertaining space as well? It's like, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Ellie, I've got two questions I want to ask before we wrap up.
Okay.
One of them is about en suites.
Yeah.
We touched on it briefly earlier, and we talked about en suites. Having several en suites in a house probably does push it towards that a more sort of commercialized territory, and I totally get that. At the minute, VOA is rebanding a lot of properties around the country that I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah.
And now I haven't personally been affected by this, but I know a number of people who are, and I think it is a bit of it's a virus that's spreading. I think as one local authority kind of gets the tentacles into it, or it happens in one area, it seems to spread to nearby districts. I mean, and there might not be an answer to it. We might be too early on this, Ellie, but do you see that this problem could creep in? I mean, is this something that we need to be aware of from a lending point of view?
From a lending point of view, no, it's not something they look at. I personally think, and this is literally just my personal opinion, that unless you have got properties where you're effectively creating studios and they are self-contained units, I don't see how you can band rooms individually. If you've got shared kitchen facilities and things, I think where it may end up going, where you've got HMOs with kitchenettes, and more self-contained units, I think potentially. But you're kind of getting in the realms of bedsits, which generally don't have great reputations with lenders. It's not something that we do a great deal of. They don't like them. But I think there is a shift towards having bigger rooms, en suites, kitchenettes, or the standard kitchen equipment that you get in, that you can put into rooms. I hear a lot of rumours about things. I have never had a client tell me that they've actually it's been affected.
I feel like it's difficult to know it. I mean, it's definitely happening, but why and under what circumstances? And of course, the people who are quite vocal about this are incredibly frustrated. So it's difficult to know exactly where we stand with this, and it's something I'm keeping an eye on in the future.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you in the promotion of those communal spaces and the sharing facilities, and I think that's really important. And one of my cautions with en suites is, and I absolutely get the benefits of it's maybe not to put them in absolutely every room. And I hear some people, I'll see some plans that some people draw up where actually there are no shared toilets. They're all en suites. And actually they don't have a living room. They just have a kitchen, and they just have bedrooms, and each bedroom has an en suite. Yeah. And I feel like that could very much be on the target board. Yeah,
definitely. And I had one a while back, which was a real problem because they had removed the communal space entirely. And I think if you've just got, for example, like a shared sort of utility room or laundry room or something, that's more difficult to say that you can't live without it, isn't it? Rather than having a shared kitchen. But I think it's as long as you keep a really good communal space. But yeah, I think we have a lot of people that say, I have 5 en suites and 1 off suite, for example. So then it's next door. You can have a key that only works for the tenant that's using it. But it's not. It's not in the realms of studios, is it? I suppose. But
there's something for us all to keep an eye out, I guess.
Definitely.
Well, my final question is around experience, Ellie, and how our experience as investors in the HMO space will or could influence or impact the lenders that we can go with, the type of valuations that we can get. Am I right in thinking that experience does play a role?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's a really good question. Yes, it does. The more specialist lenders you go to, the way that they work is that they want to work with property investors, professional property investors, and they will need a bit more experience. So on the whole, you do need a bit of experience to go to those lenders if you're looking at that hybrid and yield-based valuation. Having said that, it doesn't need to be a huge amount of experience. You need 12 months buy-to-let experience, and you can get a mortgage on an HMO of up to 6 bedrooms. Larger HMOs you do need to have an HMO already. But up to 6 bedrooms, you just need a buy-to-let for 12 months. There are certain exceptions to that. I've had some customers where they've done quite a few refurbishments. So they've owned properties, flipped them. They've got good outside income. They might have a job which relates to property in some way. They might be a management agent or a builder, an architect, something like that. So it's sort of relevant. And I can get that through an exception. So it goes back to the point that we can talk to underwriters. I can have that conversation. I can get around criteria sometimes.
I think that'll be really great to hear for some of our listeners who are right at the beginning, who haven't got that experience, maybe young, maybe just buying their first property. In fact, I know people who are buying their first property want to buy their investment property, not their own property. Which I think is amazing.
Exactly.
So there are options there,
There's
and in part,
there's definitely options, and I think you need to balance it out, because there'll be some people that will say, well, I need to buy my own house first, and then I need to buy to let, and once I've done all of that, I'll go into HMOs. And for some people, that's the right way to do it. They want to get that experience. They want to have that knowledge around house buying. They want to know that they can run a buy-to-let for 12 months and have the confidence around that. And that's fine. And that will give you more options. The flip side of that is that that's an awful lot of cash to be tied up in properties that you don't necessarily want or need. So you can piggyback that. There are lenders that will lend you as a first-time landlord. There are lenders that will lend you as a first-time buyer, first-time landlord for HMOs. You are limited. I'm not going to lie. There are only a couple out there. It will be more expensive. You'll have a bricks and mortar valuation. It's not the ideal scenario, but it's absolutely doable. It's doable at 75%. And what it means is that you're just piggybacking onto that experience. So if you've got the confidence to do that, and that's what you want to do, absolutely do it. Because once you own that HMO for 12 months, the world is your oyster. So, you buy your one HMO for 12 months. You buy it, refurb it, refinance it. And then you can then buy your next property. And by the time you're then refinancing your second property, you've owned your first one for 12 months. You're then eligible for whatever mortgage you fancy. And you haven't tied up all of that cash in properties that aren't cash flowing and you don't want. So definitely would.
I've said it a few times today, Ellie, but this has been a fascinating conversation to me. I've learned a huge amount from this, and I'm sure our listeners have. It's just so great to just get that insight into what's actually happening on the other side and get some clarity on what's our responsibility and what we really kind of need to take responsibility for, and actually what options are available for us. And I think what's clear is that this isn't totally black and white. There are different options, and that is why people like you are there to help, and actually you have the expertise and the knowledge to help navigate people through this precarious process of picking the right lender. You definitely don't want to go to the wrong lender, put an application in, have to then go to another one, and explain why you've just had all this credit. So and so I think it's really just kind of highlighted just how important your role is to all of us out there in this industry who want to be buying more HMOs. There's so much more I want to talk about, and so I think
we'll do another one, Andy.
We're going to get you back. We're going to get you back, and we're going to talk about valuation packs. I really want to know what you think should be in valuation packs. I want to know more about all of this. So perhaps that is something that we can arrange. But in the meanwhile, for anybody listening today who is looking for some support with the finance solutions, who isn't sure which direction to go, who's maybe having some issues, then if you head over to the HMO roadmap, we have got a brand new section under finance, specialist finance solutions. You'll find Ellie and her details there, and our partnership information. You can contact Ellie there. Now, this episode's going out pretty sharpish, so you might beat us to the website before that page is live. If that's the case, just drop us an email and we'll make sure that we get your details over to Ellie, but hopefully that will be live soon. And we're so excited to be working with you, Ellie, because I think that this is a big part of the puzzle that so many people struggle with, and to have you there that has all of this expert information and knowledge, I think is going to be so important for so many people. Thank you so much for coming on, Ellie. Thank you so much for taking us behind the scenes and telling us about what you do, and everything to do with the world of the finance and financing HMOs.
It's been great. Thank you very much.